this is a father-daughter story, I like to allude to the opening sequence and think about it's a mother with the foresight and insight to protect her daughter, her unborn daughter, with these blessings and things like that. So I'm trying to explore parallel themes to what Friedkin and William Peter Blatty explored in 1973.
That's a good one.
Yeah, for me, and I think where horror is for me right now in culture and in my relationships is a way that I can make snow angels. That I can make something that's personal to me, that's meaningful to me. And in the case of The Exorcist, it's about a buffet of beliefs. As I look into the world, I see those fractures and not enough those unities. And this is a way that I could tell a story that's not preachy, that's not got a message to it, but it's entertainment. And it's something that people around the world will turn their heads, if not buy a ticket to.
Commandment number 1, shut the hell up.
I don't even have the strength for my usual 20-minute intro. Let's just get into the mess. We open the film on Port-au-Principe, Haiti. There we meet Victor Fielding and his wife Soren as they enjoy their honeymoon. A young boy then sees Soren and convinces her to go to a voodoo priestess. This somehow works, and she decides to go. Right off the gate, we get a taste for how stupid the characters are if a woman in a foreign nation that has no awareness of the lay of the land is to be dragged away by a random little boy just because he told her that she will get a free blessing for her baby. Where is Victor in all of this? Do you mean to tell me that he would let his 9 months pregnant wife wander around in another country he isn't familiar with without bothering to tell him where she is? We then see a voodoo priestess initiating a ceremony to bless Soren's unborn child. I wonder if this will have any effect on the plot later. Listen, I have no religious affiliation whatsoever. I'm not going to judge anyone for their beliefs. But in what world does spitting on someone's feet constitute as a blessing? Is there a religion that actually does this? What advantage would be given for having someone else's saliva on another person's foot? If I had a random voodoo priestess drinking a bunch of water only to then spit on my wife's feet like this woman did here, chances are I'd want to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. Victor then sees his wife arrive, which, again, he should have been with her considering that they're in a country that they're not familiar with. They then go to a church where we are given several establishing shots of the religious iconography. Do you remember when they did this in the original? Back when it was used as a setup to establish the baseline for the origin of evil that would later go on to infect Reagan? But here it's simply used as a reference and a reason to make the audience hate Victor for how much more stupid he'll be displayed in just a few seconds. In regards to Victor's stupidity, he wants to take a shot of the city from the bell tower. He then tells his wife to come up with him to the tower. What in the ever-living hell is wrong with you? Your wife is 9 months pregnant and your first thought is to have her walk up an entire flight of stairs. First you leave her alone in a crowded marketplace to be taken away by a random child on the street where her feet are then spit on by a voodoo priestess, and then you want her to walk up an entire flight of uneven stone stairs. What possible justification could you have for doing this, you absolute hamburger helping idiot? Soren then tells Victor that she can't go up because her feet hurt, but that he should go take the shot anyway. He then leaves her alone. Again. At their hotel, an earthquake suddenly occurs. How inconvenient. We then see Soren as she struggles to get down the steps. A pink car almost hits Victor before another car slams into it. We then see the stairs collapse where a man falls below. For some reason, Soren doesn't stop but continues to run, which causes her to fall, much like this film's quality, right into the dirt. There goes that character. So long, Soren. I hardly knew you. Victor then rushes into the hotel and notices... Are you fucking kidding me? Victor sees Soren lying on the ground, with no marks, cuts, or bruises visible whatsoever. How is she not dead? How is her brain not splattered all over the walls? How are there no cuts or bruises on her body, let alone on her face? How is it that she not only survived, but the baby did too? What is happening here? Does anyone even care? $30 million certainly didn't.
To me, it's trying to bring an integrity to a franchise that means a lot to me as a movie geek. And so just get the right team together, work your ass off, and make a movie.
Liar!
Victor is then led to his wife in a makeshift hospital where he is informed that, due to complications, that he would need to choose between being able to save either his wife or his child. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious the choice that he made. But this scene still makes the attempt to be emotional despite the cataclysmic wave of idiocy from having suffered from a script written by a group of thick chuckle fucks whose IQ levels barely registered at room temperature. We then cut to black before opening 13 years later. So that opening scene was embarrassing. It can only get better from here, right?
Wrong!
We then meet Victor's daughter Angela, who is busy looking through her parents' photos. Let's compare. In the original, we had a single mother doing her best to raise her daughter, all while dealing with her hectic life as a film star and the ongoing struggle from a recent divorce. There we got to see the dynamics of the relationship mother Chris and daughter Reagan held through their constant sarcasm, endless laughs, moments of vulnerability, and reassurances of love. That she would be able to reassure a daughter who had lost her father from the divorce that there was no one to blame, and that she as her mother would only ever do her best to be there for her. Here we have a single father who let his pregnant wife randomly wander the streets through a city that she had never encountered while her feet were spit on, had nagged his wife he was aware was 9 months pregnant to walk up a flight of stairs to the top of a tower just for one photo, only to nearly get himself killed because he was too stupid to not move out of the way despite being fully aware of the vehicle driving towards him. Yes, I'm aware that the car was halted by an electrical pole, but that doesn't change the fact that he was still running towards it before the pole even crashed. Just because you can ape every story beat from the original and far superior film doesn't mean that you should, and we still have an hour and a half to go. Angela then has breakfast with her dad where she decides to no longer eat meat because of a documentary film that she had seen. Because if there's one thing that people needed in their horror movies, it's meta commentary about animal rights. Who knows? Maybe we'll get a line about the patriarchy too. She then asks her dad if she can do her homework at her friend's house instead of at his studio like they always do. Right away we can gauge a measure of frustration on Angela's part due to how overprotective Victor is. And you know what? There's some potential there. Perhaps we could see this girl mourning the death of her mother. Maybe we could see how that would affect her relationship with her dad. Maybe we could understand Victor's actions in being so overprotective for the sake of having lost his wife. Maybe we could. Angela steals a sausage her dad was eating, screaming about little piggies before playing hide and seek. Imagine, if you will, taking the time to explore your characters rather than having them literally run away from the plot for no reason. They then play hide and seek and Victor drops her off at school, wherein Victor relents and lets Angela study with her friend Catherine after school so long as she's home in time for dinner. It's almost like she won't be home in time for dinner. Get it? Foreshadowing. And that's literally all the character development that you'll ever get from these two. During class, Angela makes plans with Catherine and Deshauna to go out into the woods after school. We then see Victor at the boxing gym. Hey, remember in the original how Father Karras went to the boxing gym? How he used it as a means of escaping from the ongoing struggles and dealing with his sick mother while simultaneously struggling with his waning faith? How he was able to use his spiritual and physical strength as a means to overcome the evil that infected his body? How he was able to use that strength to make the ultimate sacrifice in order to save Reagan? Because this film certainly didn't. Just throw in a reference. Who cares? $30 million certainly didn't. Angela and Catherine are then seen entering the woods as they discuss their plans for a ritual to contact Angela's dead mother. I'm sorry, but you mean to tell me that Catherine is a Baptist yet she has absolutely no problem performing a pagan ritual in order to speak to the dead? Are we honestly expected to believe that neither her parents or the church ever bothered to tell her how stupid that is? Doesn't that literally go against the whole point of her religion? Also, why did these girls need to go into a tunnel in the middle of the woods for this ritual? Candles? Fine. Swinging necklace? Whatever. But a collapsed tunnel in the middle of nowhere? What in the religious fuck is happening here? Anyways, Victor is then seen photographing a family where he sees distorted images of the youngest child. Supposing this is meant to highlight that a demonic presence is nearby, but then why would the demon be at a random family's photo shoot rather than in the woods where Catherine and Angela are? I'm not sure what the entire point of this scene is in depicting a screaming child other than to make me thankful that condoms exist, but let's continue. As Victor scrolls through the shots he took, the lights begin to flicker. Victor then returns home where he finds Angela is missing. He then calls Catherine's home after Angela had told him earlier that she was going to study there. But Catherine's mom instead informs Victor that the girls said that they were going to Deshauna's house. They then contact Deshauna's mother and find out that the girls were planning on going into the woods. Victor then joins Miranda and Catherine's father Tony as they then search the woods. So, why didn't any of the parents immediately call their kids' cell phones? Why immediately go to the other parents? We, the audience, know something happened to the girls, but the parents in this universe don't. So why didn't they just call their kids? Or are we being led to believe that two 13-year-old girls in 2023 wouldn't have cell phones? Seriously? They then find the girls' backpacks and Victor then goes into the tunnel. Which, again, why is there a random tunnel in the middle of the woods that leads to nowhere? He then finds Angela's shoes and the police are called in. Since this is a horror film by David Gordon Green, that means that the police won't be helpful here whatsoever. The police officer there then shows the parents the last known footage of their daughters before claiming that they were the ones to find the shoes before Catherine's mom shuts her down with that ludicrous claim. What is the point in having this officer make the claim that they found the shoe if they were already aware that the only way that they could have had that evidence is due to the parents having already found it? So not only will the police be useless in this movie, but they'll also be delusional. Got it. Miranda then tells Victor that she wasn't aware of Angela being friends with Catherine, which... What? Apparently Catherine is Angela's best friend and vice versa, but neither set of parents were aware of this? This never came up in any previous conversations? Okay then. Catherine's dad then states to the officer that Catherine is a free spirit, that she is popular at school, she is well versed, and she is a youth group leader at church. Yes, because the best possible alternative to establishing the characteristics of our main characters and showing the audience how these characters interact with each other is to have another character so monotonously monologue about their personality and characteristics instead. Victor then tells Tony that Angela is not a free spirit like Catherine is and that he and his daughter are closer because of that. So not only is Victor subconsciously insulting Catherine, but he's also implying that his daughter is better than theirs because she's not a free spirit as Tony described Catherine. I'm sorry, why are we supposed to like this character if he's going around insulting those parents and their daughter who went missing? Anyways, this would have been made so much easier if these two girls carried cell phones, but according to the director, no 13-year-old in 2023 would own a smartphone. Get stuffed. The officer then tries to calm the parents by stating, and I quote, "Statistically, it's likely your girls are out just being girls. Would it not have made more sense to come up with an actual statistic? Hell, just bullshit ones such as, statistically, many young girls at age 13 are known to wander away from home. Do you know what happened when I typed in girls just being girls statistics on Google? I got this.
If a family has 2 children, and we know that one is a girl, what is the probability that the family has 2 girls?"
This script has about as much subtlety as a brick and the depth of a shot glass. Victor then goes to his car to retrieve the scarf that Angela had earlier. He then goes to one of the officers who gives it to one of their canines to sniff out a scent. Why? Out of all of the possible moments to have done this, did he decide to wait until now to do this? Why was this not something that the police would have asked any of these parents in locating their children? If the parents found the girls' backpacks and Angela's shoes, would they not have bothered to use any of those items first? Did those items get put in evidence bags first? But if they were, why did they wait until Victor gave them a scarf to do this? Why did they not do this earlier? Why are they so incompetent? Anyways, we then go to the school where Deshauna is reading Jabberwocky, a nonsense poem whose description fits the characteristics of this script. While I may not be a teacher, even I know that reciting a poem about a demonic entity that haunts the woods is not the best material to be reading to a group of school children dealing with 2 of their classmates having disappeared in the woods. I know you like your symbolism, David, but the attempt at being somewhat tactful would be greatly appreciated. Victor is then seen at a shelter questioning the locals for any information. One of the patrons there makes a crass remark about Victor's daughter which causes him to fly into a momentary rage, and you know what? This was actually refreshing to see. The rampant tension that builds in Victor's desperation in his search for his daughter is effective through the steadiness in its pace, and I can at least commend the film for that. Unfortunately, that's all I can really say for it before it continues to go downhill. Case in point, when Victor returns home and sees his lights on, rather than turning around or calling the police, he then decides to walk in where one of his neighbors makes his presence known by suddenly grabbing Victor, only to then inform him that he brought a religious doctor and several others to bless his daughter's room. One might think that Victor would have already learned his lesson when he let his pregnant wife wander around with a group of religious strangers who spit water on her feet while they were in a foreign country. But here he has no visible reaction to his neighbor and a bunch of strangers having broken into his home and performing a religious ceremony. I don't know my audience too well, but I would hope that any one of them would be slightly bothered if someone were to break into their homes and spread religious items all around their area. Victor then plays with the paper fortune teller that Angela was playing with earlier. And of course, it lands on the corner that says Mother, because symbolism. The neighbor then decides to walk uninvited into Victor's home again. How stupid does this individual have to be that he was able to misinterpret this statement?
Get the fuck out, okay?
To somehow translating to, come back in. The neighbor then explains that he had once had a sick sister who was the reason that he was willing to go to such an extreme measure of belief. He then follows this up by stating that he is Victor's neighbor and he only wants to help. I'm not so sure what world the writers live in if they would write in the justification that just because you once had a sick family member, that somehow gives you probable cause to not only break into someone's home with a bunch of strangers and force their religious beliefs onto someone else, but to misinterpret their initial statement in wanting them to get out to be able to come back into their home again. Victor then looks out the rainy window where he says that Angela doesn't have a raincoat. We then cut to a dead horse lying in the rain. Get it? Because Angela's in the rain? Even though Angela was kidnapped by a demonic entity and this horse is dead? Yeah, no. The farmer there then has his son go to the barn to retrieve supplies for the horse, where he then finds Catherine and Angela. Victor then displays how competent his parenting is translated over to his driving as he nearly kills a dozen people on his way to the hospital. The officer there then makes Angela tell Victor what she told her, that she initially believed to have been gone for only a few hours when in reality it was 3 days. In addition to their disorientation, the girls' feet are revealed to have been badly burnt. The doctors then give the girls a full body checkup and, you know what? This scene was quite well done for showcasing how uncomfortable yet accurate what this entire process would entail. Good job, movie. Now if only we could work on that pesky writing. The police then inform the parents that the mental health of the girls is perfectly fine and that they have nothing to worry about.
You're such a dumbass.
Such a dumbass.
I'm not too sure that if a child were to disappear, only to return 3 days later with burns on their feet and a lapse in memory, to what indicator would be given that their mental health was perfectly intact? Wouldn't the fact that their feet were burnt and a lapse in memory be a cause for concern? If that wasn't an issue, then surely Catherine dragging her face across the glass would? No? Maybe that Angela slammed her hand against the glass for no reason? Why does no one care about these children? How is it that the brain capacity of every adult in this movie is on par with that of a cheese sandwich? After they return home, Victor asks Angela why she was out in the woods. She then tells him that she was trying to contact her mother. Is this child not aware that cemeteries are a thing? That when a human passes, that they are then buried? That she could have simply asked her father if her mother had a grave that she could visit? But I suppose pagan rituals in a dark tunnel in the middle of the woods are the better alternative, am I right? Angela then tells her father that, upon the ritual being completed, that she heard the voice of his spirit tell her that her mother wasn't there. After this, she then looks over and sees a demon and... My god, that's the design they went with? After having no reaction to any of the things that his daughter had told him, Victor only gets upset after Angela tells him to leave her alone. Anyways, we then see a catatonic Catherine as she stares in the mirror before she has a vision of a bloodied Angela cutting open her stomach. Again, how are the adults in this movie so blind to the obvious trauma that their daughters are dealing with that they would be perfectly fine with one of them telling them that they had contacted a spirit in the woods, or the other as she stands mute while staring in the mirror? Hey, remember how in the original, the moment that Chris saw that Reagan was acting out of the ordinary, that she took a progressive level of attention at how she would go about treating her daughter? From her daughter being diagnosed for ADHD, to then being tested for infection, to then being tested for any psychological issues, to then having a procedure done to the frontal lobe of her brain, only in opting to use an exorcism as a last resort, as opposed to here where the adults are leaving their openly traumatized children alone rather than helping them come to terms with the damage inflicted. I miss the old Exorcist film. As a matter of fact, I'll be right back. Man, what a great film. Back to this shit. Catherine then wants to sleep with her parents and her mother lets her. Are we about to see parents that actually care about their children? As Victor is brushing his teeth, Angela then comes into the room. Upon her lack of response, rather than comforting her, he sends her back to bed. I guess that answers that question. As the lights continue to flicker, Angela reappears as she speaks to the air. After this, Victor takes his daughter's mental well-being into consideration and gets her therapy to deal with her trauma. Nah, I'm just kidding. He then goes to the fuse box after noticing the flickering lights earlier. So he notices when the electricity doesn't work but not his traumatized daughter. Okay then. The next morning, he goes to deliver breakfast and notices that Angela has wet the bed. After this, Victor takes his daughter's mental health into consideration and gets her the therapy. Okay, that's the last one, I promise. When Victor tries to draw a bath for her, the water turns black and Angela appears to have ripped off a toenail. Victor goes looking for her and Angela then tries to wrap Soren's scarf around his face, which then causes his head to be slammed into the bedpost. This then finally awakens his common sense, where he then takes Angela to the hospital. After having Angela sedated, the doctors document more photos of the newly formed marks on Angela's body. We then see Catherine in church, who is sporting a fresh cut on her cheek and a bruise on her forehead. So why are Catherine's parents ignoring the sudden marks on their daughter's face? Considering that the marks weren't there in the hospital, would it not be alarming to see these new marks so suddenly appear? Or did all of this happen off screen? Are we going to get any answers here?
Stop asking questions!
With their daughter acting so strange, rather than taking her outside, Catherine's father simply ignores her and continues listening to the preacher. Sure, just continue to ignore your traumatized daughter who's showing signs of distress. After returning from communion, Catherine's parents find that she is missing. So her younger siblings, who were aware of their sister's distress, didn't bother to tell their parents about their sister suddenly up and leaving? Sure, it may have been rude. But wouldn't the parents of a child who'd only just returned to them after having been missing for 3 days be so overly protective of her, rather than being so nonchalant about leaving their younger children to watch over Catherine? Instead of one of the parents staying behind for communion, or, perish the thought, both of them stay behind? Surely the pastor would have been considerate enough to understand why the parents wouldn't want to leave their daughter's side. Obviously, we, the audience, know that Catherine is possessed, but the parents don't. Does no one in this movie care about these girls? I mean, fuck it. Just listen to her mother when she realizes that her daughter is missing again.
Where'd she go?
That's it? No sense of urgency? No panic? No anxiety about your daughter who had just come back after having been missing for 3 days having disappeared again? And yet your only response to this is asking your other children where Catherine is as if you were asking them what their favorite hot dog topping is? Why are you so terrible at parenting? What cupcake-headed muffin brain decided to write them like this? And this is the first movie in a trilogy? I mean, at least the director waited until the second movie in his trilogy to ruin that franchise. What's his excuse here? Catherine then returns while the pastor continues his sermon and, I'm gonna be honest, I found the scene simultaneously stupid and hilarious. You have this pastor recanting this sermon, only for a little girl covered in cuts and blood to walk down the aisle like a zombie, and rather than stopping or immediately rushing forward to help, he just keeps giving his lecture.
And there seems to be no sign of intelligent life anywhere.
Catherine then begins to repeatedly yell out, "The body and the blood." When I heard this line, I found it hard not to laugh. At least in the original when Reagan was overtaken by the demon, it was actually horrifying for the sake of hearing such a demonic voice coming out of a young girl's mouth. Here it sounds like a 12-year-old Gen Zer about to throw a tantrum because she can't find her iPhone charger. Catherine then keeps repeating,
The body and the blood, the body and the blood, the body and the blood, the body and the blood.
Aw, shut when you think about it.
Oh no. Why do I get the feeling that this is just another version of this?
Evil dies tonight! Evil dies tonight! Evil dies tonight! Evil dies tonight!
Catherine is then taken to the hospital where the stupidity of Catherine's father makes his presence known once again. He claims that all of the recent events and weird episodes were caused by hormones.
What about the neurologist? Didn't he say that hormones?
You're the town dumbass.
It's only a new low point for the first time in this film if I found myself agreeing with Victor for once.
They take off their shoes, they walk 30 miles. You think that's hormones? Puberty?
As of having read the script, Catherine's mother surmises that, due to Catherine having not been baptized as an infant, instead waiting for her to be older to do so due to their beliefs, that was what allowed for the demonic possession to occur. That's quite a leap for her to take rather than simply assuming that her daughter's psyche had broken due to the trauma inflicted from the previous events. But sure, we'll go with that. Also, is that how demonic possession works? That if you aren't baptized, that you're more likely to be possessed? If that was the case, then how did the demon in the first film possess Father Karras at the end? Or are we just simply going about retroactively rewriting the original film by having it be that Father Karras wasn't baptized just so that the writers can justify this terrible line? Miranda then states that when Jesus died, that he went to hell to declare his authority over the devil. If that was the case, then how do you explain this scene?
I'm Damien Karras. And I'm the devil.
Or the scene of Father Karras being possessed at the end of the film? You can't? What a surprise. Anyways, she then states that, like Jesus, the girls returned after having spent 3 days in hell. Even if the girls did indeed spend 3 days in hell, then why were their feet the only parts of their body that were fuck it, let's just keep going. In Angela's room, her nurse Anne checks in on her and Angela begins speaking to her about her past, along with the name of a child before Angela begins bleeding profusely from below. Anne then goes to Victor's home and gives him a book from Chris McNeil, who had documented her experiences after the events of the first film. Victor then shames Anne for her beliefs and blames God for the death of his wife. While understandable that this is a man grieving, perhaps he should consider the fact that God wasn't the one to have left his 9-month pregnant wife wander around in the middle of a city to then having her feet spit on by a random voodoo priestess. Anne then tells Victor that she used to be practicing to become a nun until she became pregnant out of wedlock and had the baby aborted, something that she had never told anyone else, but that she had heard it from Angela. Victor then reads Chris's book and notices the similarities of how the marks on Angela were similar to those on Reagan as described in the book. He then watches old interviews of Chris before deciding to contact her where they agree to meet her at her home. As he drives to her house, we hear a modern rendition of Tubular Bells. When I heard this, I could only cringe in my seat as I knew that this wouldn't be the last time I would hear this song. Anne then meets with Father Maddox and Victor meets Chris McNeil. Chris then explains that she never personally witnessed Reagan's exorcism, and when Victor asks her why, she says, and I quote, "In my opinion, it's because I'm not a member of the damn patriarchy." And there it is. You would think that she would have been just a bit more thankful towards those two members of the church, who were men I might add, who sacrificed their lives to save her daughter. Does anyone else remember what happened the last time that Chris had a confrontation with a possessed Reagan? That maybe the reason Father Marin and Father Karras kept her out wasn't because they were men, but because they didn't want her to be sexually, physically, and telekinetically assaulted again? But sure, there's nothing more insidious than the exorcism of an archaic demon than the patriarchy. For fuck's sake. She wrote an entire book on the events of the first film, but somehow she forgot how her possessed daughter sexually, physically, and telekinetically assaulted her. What pantsless ass pastry wrote this festering gimboid of a script? Victor may find this amusing. Then again, a pair of ripped pants has more social awareness than this lumpy pork roast. Are we going to ignore the fact that Father Karras committed suicide to protect Reagan and Chris, and act that his religion espouses as such a sin that would condemn him to hell? This line is so absolutely asinine and extremely disrespectful to such a high caliber towards his character. The fact that you can see just how painful it is for Ellen Burstyn to deliver this line shows just how far gone this movie is. Kristen states that she may not have witnessed the exorcism, but she definitely did witness the possession. So now she is aware of how her daughter attacked her? Then shouldn't that give her all the more reason and understanding why she shouldn't have been anywhere near the exorcism if she was aware of the danger? So what was the point of that line? Just because the writers wanted to defer to the meta doesn't refute the fact that this character, when based on everything that she has experienced, would have had absolutely no reason to say that. Hey, remember in Halloween Ends how Laurie was writing a memoir of her life to help other trauma victims come to terms with their past and went absolutely nowhere? Yeah, neither did the director, because now we have Chris explaining to Victor that she wrote a book to help people through their trauma, yet due to the book's success, that Reagan had cut off contact with her mother. Oh, so we're just going to gloss over that little fact? We're not even going to bother to develop that whatsoever? Though, honestly, I can't blame Reagan if her mother is going to blame the patriarchy for her stupidity. Chris then laments the loss of her daughter as she wishes to see her face one last time. We will remember that line. Victor then says that he contacted Chris because of the similarities that he had noticed on the bodily marks from Regan versus the ones on Angela. Victor and Chris then meet up with Anne, who has enlisted Father Maddox for an exorcism. Victor and Chris then go to Catherine's home where they find Tony lying on the ground. As Victor tends to Tony, Chris leaves to go find Catherine.
How come every time some scurry shit happen that we need to stick together, you white people always say let's split up?
Victor then finds Miranda and the other children. They're not even injured, which is a good sign. What is not a good sign is that they are aware that they have a demon in their house and yet they're choosing to just sit there. Do these characters even want to live at this point? I am genuinely curious. This is the exact same problem with Sandra in Halloween Kills. She is right up against the door and has the opportunity to escape, yet she decides to stand there and let Michael stab her in the neck. Chris then finds Catherine and confronts the demon. 40 years prior, when she was a little over 30 years old, she barely escaped with her life after having narrowly escaped the demon's assault. 40 years later, as a 70-year-old woman, she has absolutely no worries about confronting another demon. What advantage could Chris have as a 70-year-old woman in her attempt to face off against a demon that she was aware had very nearly killed her when she was 30 years old? The demon then informs Chris that Reagan is now in hell before convulsing on the bed in a scene that will cause most people with hypersensitivity to close their eyes. Not necessarily because it was scary, but because the filmmakers weren't even bothered to send out an epilepsy warning for how many flashing lights were on the screen. Chris then attempts to expel the demon with her version of an exorcism which only lasted 18 seconds. There are so many reasons to praise how detailed the final act of the original film is as the two priests bring about the expulsion of the demon by means of a spiritual war, aided by their weapons of faith with holy water, holy texts in scripture, a crucifix, and their very lives, all of which led to the deaths of both the priests and the demon itself. But here it's simply insulting that this character has been reduced to nothing more than a cheap imitation of such a monumentally impactful moment that she would then so blandly proclaim her own hollow copy of that very exorcism in less than 20 seconds. This is no longer insulting, it's simply sad. Case in point when Chris believes that she was successful, only for Catherine to have tricked her and ended up stabbing her in the eyes with a crucifix. Holy Moses, that's where we're going now? Not that it was shocking or anything, considering how stupid Chris was acting, but that this was a choice made in how we wanted to treat our legacy character? Really? The demon then asks Chris if she still wants to see her daughter. Hey, remember that line from earlier? Before Chris responds that she doesn't. You would think that Chris would be screaming from the pain of having been stabbed in both eyes, but I guess being quiet makes more sense? Well, for this movie it would. After having heard Chris, Victor then walks up the steps. Not runs, mind you, but walks despite having heard Chris's yells as she was being stabbed. He then sees a vision of Saran atop the stairs as he has flashbacks to when she was on the stairwell during the earthquake. Why is this movie acting as if it earned that payoff when it had only occurred because of Victor's incompetence? Victor then sees Chris missing her eyes and a possessed Catherine, and this is his response.
What did you do?
No emotion, no reaction, no fear, no panic, just a bland, empty, sterile response. He then tries again.
What did you do?
That was better, Victor, but maybe on this next take you can make it sound like you actually care. Father Maddox then goes to the Catholic Church to seek permission in performing an exorcism. Victor then meets with Chris and delivers an apology so bland that I am honestly surprised that Gordon Ramsay did not show up just to yell at him to add more seasoning. What a donkey. Catherine's parents then turn to their pastor Don Ravens, while Stuart, a Pentecostal preacher, is also brought in. Victor then visits Soren's grave and finds a hoodoo practitioner named Dr. Bahibe, whom he recruits as well. We then see Dr. Bahibe as she draws a ring while Anne sets up a bunch of medical equipment. Alright, stop. How in the absolute hell was Anne able to get any of this equipment? Do you honestly expect me to believe that hospitals would allow their employees to just take home medical equipment whenever they want? You think there's a sign-out sheet like they're renting out a book from the library? Does the hospital have exorcisms as part of their medical practices? It's one thing for a demonic entity to overtake two 13-year-old girls. It's another matter entirely that this film would attempt to convince me, let alone anyone, that a hospital would immediately forego any mental or physical checks to immediately jumping to an exorcism. You mean to tell me that the hospital had absolutely no qualms about releasing the same girl who shouted obscenities in a church as she was discovered from head to toe in blood? How telling is your film if a movie from 1973 was more medically accurate in its portrayal of medicine than a movie that came out in 2023? Is this film seriously trying to convince anyone that the two telepathic and telekinetic demons were completely complicit in being transported home without trying to escape or harm anyone? That they would have been aware of the state of the girls only to then let Victor also take Angela home is insane. If two orderlies as strong as the one shown here were barely able to handle her, what makes anyone think that this walking pizza stick would do any better? The fact that Angela had to be strapped to a wheelchair with leather bands in her attempt to escape, yet Catherine had no problem in being carried into the house with no restraints whatsoever? Did they sedate her? If they didn't, then why is this demon so willing to allow this to happen knowing fully well what their intentions are? You've got to do better, David. We then see the adults as they bolt down a couple of chairs before the camera focuses hardcore on a syringe and sedative, implying that the adults had sedated the girls. Father Maddox then arrives and informs Anne that his plea was denied and that he does not have permission to perform the exorcism due to the church's belief not only in the possibility of someone being killed, but in the church's belief that the girls are simply suffering from a psychiatric disorder. So if the film is telling us that Father Maddox had already had multiple encounters with the girls where he witnessed their possession, then why did he not present any evidence to the church as such in order to gain permission to do the exorcism? For an individual such as Father Karras in the first film, whose faith had been waning, even he took it upon himself to gather physical evidence by means of recording the demon chanting in another language, this being one of the requirements to indicate that a person was possessed if they were to speak in a foreign tongue that they themselves were not consciously aware of or familiar with. So is this the reason that they didn't bother to show us Father Maddox's visits to the girls, even though that payoff wouldn't have been earned anyway, due to him only being in the film for less than 5 minutes? Before he leaves, he then gives Anne his Holy Bible, and Anne rallies everyone together. As they prepare to initiate the ritual, they all remove their shoes, implying that the ground that they stand on is holy, except for Tony, who keeps his shoes on, implying his struggle with his faith. I wonder if that will have any effect on the plot. As the adults walk into the room, Miranda notices the EKG machine, to which Anne explains that the girls' heartbeats are in sync due to the possession. As they begin the exorcism, the lights in their house begin to flicker. We then see Chris in the hospital as the lights in her room also begin to flicker. Somehow she can sense this through, I don't know, the Force? Wait, wrong franchise. They then begin the exorcism with Anne reading from the Bible, only for the demons to taunt her. Miranda then suggests that they need to try a different method. Did she really think that an exorcism would be that easy? That having Anne read from the Bible for 2 minutes would immediately resolve the issue? This character is one of the most useless individuals in any horror movie ever conceived, that her personality would have equated to nothing more than amounting to a soggy newspaper soaked in a sea of mud and piss. Pastor Don then screams for the demons to be silenced. So he's a Baptist preacher, yet he's not even going to read from the Bible? Nothing from Psalms? Just screaming for the demons to be quiet? Okay. Later on, Dr. Bahibe is then seen making her own holy water from the water in the bathtub and... Wait, I'm sorry. Why did you wait until midway into the exorcism to do this? If the doctor knew what she was getting into, then why didn't she have this already prepared? Or does her aspect of the ritual dictate that you need to use the bathtub of the father whose daughter is possessed? How does any of this work? Also, you mean to tell me that the entire time that the doctor was making her own holy water that the demons just sat there not even attempting to escape? Really? Even if they couldn't, they wouldn't have bothered to try regardless? Anyways, they then read from Ezekiel 16 while the holy water is poured onto the girls' heads. Miranda then questions them as to what they are doing. I've only stated before how useless she was, but for her to be this blind that even Chris would roll her eyes at how stupid she is being is only going to further show just how much of a useless tofu loaf she's been displayed to be this entire time. She is a practicing Baptist and is currently witnessing a religious practitioner pouring water over a demon's head, and she still doesn't know what's going on? I don't have the strength anymore, nor the patience, nor the crayons to explain to this woman how much of a nutless pistachio she is. Let's just keep going. We're almost there, guys. The girls then attempt to expel the demons with vapor from their internal temperatures being spewed out. I'm not even kidding, that's literally a line in the movie.
It's vapor from inside. They're at a critical temperature at the start of an eruption.
Okay. The doctor then starts a fire whose smoke combats the vapor that had just been expelled. I'm sorry, Haitian hoodoo is now magic that can fight hell demons with smoke that sucks those demons into the fire? What is this? What the fuck am I watching? The doctor then gives Victor a bowl of... What is that? Is that the demon smoke in liquid form? I don't even know anymore. She then tells him to dump it to the east, far from the house. So, why does he have to do it? Would it not make more sense for her to do it considering she is the practitioner for this form of the ritual? Or does her side of the ritual dictate that someone else has to pour out the bowl? Oh fuck it, who cares? I don't even know anymore. Wait a minute, why is he holding it with one hand? This is the exorcism that is expelling the very demons possessing his daughter and her friend, and he's willing to risk it all by holding the bowl that he was just told how to properly dispose of with one hand? Jesus H. Christmas. This man possesses no more brains than I do in my elbow. After he pours the bowl, he notices Father Maddox having returned. Wait a minute, was he here the entire time? Because if that was the case, then what point would there be for him to be in the car but not in the house helping? If it's to display his hesitancy, then it's too little too late considering how much we had seen this man begging the church to allow him to do the exorcism, only for him to do a complete 180 and just give up that easily. Tony then enters the house and, oh look, he removed his shoes, so I guess he's ready to actually be useful, right? Don't worry, we'll get to Tony alright. Catherine then burns the cross that Anne is holding. Victor then regains his faith and begins to recite the Lord's Prayer with the rest of the adults present. Oh, so he's regained his faith? Perhaps we'd like to highlight that point as being more important considering the build-up to this one moment? No? Okay. Angela then reveals that, given the choice to save Seren or Angela, that he had chosen to save Seren. Angela then states that God played a trick on Victor, that despite his choice for Seren, Angela survived. They then state that Victor needs to make a choice. One girl lives and one girl dies. And you know what? The concept for the scene was actually quite refreshing. The level of tension that would arise for the sake of these parents being forced to confront such a harrowing choice of one daughter surviving for the other being sent to suffer for all eternity is an excellent display of character writing. Having them wrestle with such a choice as these two demons torment their parents with the voices of their daughters, not from a sense of desperation, but one of an immeasurable level of cruelty on the part of the demons and understanding exactly how difficult such a decision would be to make. For this young girl to state to her father that he never truly wanted her, landing the notion of causing one to wonder whether this was the demon using this as a means to torture this man, or if Angela had emerged for the briefest of moments to express her true feelings towards her father. And I must at least commend these young women for their performances at this moment as they are able to so seamlessly transition between such an entity to their respective selves. To have this demon repeat back to Victor the very words that he had told the doctor in having him save his wife, all while having this demon speaking those very same words in his own voice. It is so off-putting, unsettling, and well executed. Unfortunately, it's immediately pushed to the side for the next moment shown here. For some reason, throughout the entirety of this ordeal, despite the measures of having recited the Lord's Prayer and the holy water being so effective, the adults simply choose to stand there rather than continuing the exorcism as they were doing before. Father Maddox then returns and despite him having stated that he couldn't do so earlier, now begins to perform his own exorcism. Could have used you a couple of minutes ago, buddy, but everything's fine here now. Thank you. The demons gather their strength and snap his neck. Oh, so he's gone now? Just like that? This is quite a mess. What was the point in showing this priest for less than 5 minutes to then having him come in at the last second while dual wielding a cross and rosary to then getting his neck snapped? While understandable in this film being drastically different to the original, for it to be this violent in an effort to gather any appeal rather than building towards that payoff is quite irksome. Throughout its original iteration, the demon Pazazu was never so dead set on hurting them, more so on tormenting them mentally. The entire point of the original exorcism being that it never truly worked, only ending in Father Marin's death. The demon only being defeated after Father Karras willingly allowed himself to be possessed, only for him to sacrifice his life. Good only persevered because it was able to both figuratively and literally embrace the evil and kill both it and himself. Having the father here enter as a deus ex possessu, only to kill him for the sake of a cheap jump scare, is so artificial in how pathetic it is. As if it wasn't insulting enough how quickly this was literally forced on our characters, but for this film to play such an iconic piece that made the original so recognizable as a means of facilitating any emotion is disgusting, lazy, and downright pathetic. that this film kept drilling into our heads how the power of collective belief was the only answer, only to then throw it all to the side and say, actually, love is all you need, is only causing such an enormous level of tonal whiplash. The fact that this is what causes the heartbeats to finally split as a means of the girls returning to their individual selves is ridiculous to have built up one theme this entire movie to ignore it altogether in the last 10 minutes of this movie is insane. Even more insane is that throughout all of this, Tony hardly made any attempt to save his daughter, only to come in at the last possible moment to witness the demons making the ultimatum of choosing between the two, only to then run away into the other room. That he would never have even made the attempt to reach his daughter despite being able to hear perfectly well from the other room that it was working perfectly fine for Angela, only to then backstab all of them and then choosing Catherine. If the devil were to view Victor's grief as a trick by his having chosen to save Soren, only for Angela to be the one to survive, then would that not cause everyone in the room to pause? Especially for the next moment where Tony chooses to save Catherine. If they thought that God of all individuals were to play tricks, then what line of reasoning would cause one to trust the envoy of the devil? For some reason, they then untie Angela, to which Angela headbutts Victor so hard that he flies across the room into another room, yet somehow he survived. Right. Angela then begins floating, which causes Chris back in the hospital to clutch at her chest. Again, how's this possible? Whatever. We've only got 5 more minutes. Chris, or Angela, honestly, I can't tell anymore. It's really bad editing and really bad storytelling. One of them then sees the demon before Angela spews out a swirling vortex. And good God, did this effect look terrible. It honestly looked like a CGI shot you'd see in a 90s sci-fi flick. She then flatlines and Catherine returns, if only for a second, before her head goes limp. Her spirit then appears in the same area that the girls ended up in the woods, where the demon then drags Catherine's spirit to hell because it is revealed that the chosen one was the one chosen to die. I love how this movie attempts to convince the audience through a flashback that the blessing Soren received earlier was the reason that Angela was saved. That the reason Angela's soul was saved was because a random woman spit on Soren's feet, even though we literally heard the demon make the ultimatum of choosing one girl to live and one girl to die. And, you know, because they were possessed. Wait, so what if Victor chose to save his daughter instead? Is this film seriously trying to convince me or anyone that if Angela was chosen to be saved, going by its own logic, then Catherine would have been saved and Angela killed? Then the entire montage of the blessing became pointless. So, why? Anyways, Pastor Don then states how they were tricked. Thank you, Pastor Don, for your insight, and then begins using the defibrillator on Catherine while Stewart is in the process of calling the police and paramedics, while Dr. Bahibe then extinguishes one of the candle flames. Get it, guys? Because symbolism? The police then arrive, and in perhaps the most unbelievable moment in the movie, no one is arrested or taken in for questioning. Let me explain. The police are aware that the 2 girls of these families had been missing for 3 days with no explanation whatsoever, only for the girls to return 3 days later with burns on their feet, a lapse in memory, and a quick descent into madness, with one of whom assaulted an elderly woman by stabbing her in the eyes with a crucifix and blinding her permanently. The police then showed up to see 2 chairs with restraints bolted to the floor in the middle of a runic circle. One of those 2 girls now dead, a priest with his neck bent completely in the opposite direction, and religious iconography spread everywhere. There is no possible way that this could so easily be explained away other than coming to the conclusion that they were all part of a cult and killed the girl and the priest. No law enforcement official would walk into a house like that with a room filled with religious iconography, medical equipment, and 2 dead bodies and just accept that there was a real exorcism that had occurred. We then see that Anna's taken the fall for this, since we see that the police inform her later on to wait for legal counsel. But if that were the case, then wouldn't the police be suspicious of all the other individuals who were present for the exorcism? How would any of their stories possibly match up with whatever Anne would have told the police? Or did she just tell them what to say when the police would have arrived off screen? Anne then gives a speech about her belief in hope being a choice in which one may choose to seek out what joys surround us in life. While she gives this speech, we see Tony sitting alone in a diner, Victor visiting Soren's grave, Angela in school, and Reagan visiting Chris in the hospital. Because of course she did. They just couldn't help themselves now, could they? We then get a lingering shot of Angela smiling as she looks at Catherine's empty desk. What in the absolute hell did I just watch? What in the tone-deaf hell was this ending? We had just witnessed a young girl being dragged to hell not even 5 minutes earlier, yet the film ends with a rousing speech about hope while having Angela smiling as she looks outside? There isn't any hope for the child locked in eternal suffering, I'll tell you that much. What two-sided loser was responsible for writing this scene? Why did the writers make Chris McNeil into an idiot that will blame the patriarchy for not witnessing the exorcism of her daughter, while making her forget how her daughter sexually, physically, and telekinetically assaulted her, only to have her double back by stating that she wrote a book about her experiences? Why was the boxing teacher there for the exorcism if he wasn't going to do anything other than calling the paramedics at the end? How can this film attempt to convince me that two 13-year-old girls in 2023 wouldn't have cell phones that the parents could have tried to call? How would the police have so willingly just accepted two dead people in a room with two chairs bolted to the ground, with the room filled with religious paraphernalia and medical equipment? Can you imagine how the conversation between the adults and the police would have went? His neck, it just spun around all by itself. And the cross carved on the dead girl's forehead? Also by itself. Well, you heard it, Jim. Time to wrap it up and get home for supper. The fact that Ellen Burstyn said no to this movie, only agreeing to do it after Blumhouse agreed to fund her scholarship for young actors, is literally the only redeeming quality of this movie, and that's hardly saying anything. Can we please keep this clown away from the horror genre? It's not enough that he turned one of the most iconic horror villains to date into nothing more than a geriatric idiot killed by the same woman who made yogurt commercials designed to help old people poop easier. Now we have to sit back and watch this hack ruin another franchise. I'm not sure why they were worried about Taylor Swift's movie killing box office revenue for this. The movie being dog shit on its own will probably do that just fine by itself. I never assign scores as I feel they take away from the overall point of the story in terms of the writing and characters, but this film broke that metric for me. 3 out of 10, I need a beer, fuck this movie.